Hey, Michelle, aren't you guys about to start reading Fahrenheit 451?
Yeah, we're starting tomorrow. Why?
Oh, I was just checking out what CommonLit has on censorship, and I came across a letter Kurt Vonnegut wrote to an Iowa school board member.
I don't understand your point.
All right, so the guy didn't like Slaughterhouse-Five, so he burned all the copies of it in the school's furnace. This happened somewhere in the early 1970s. That would be a great activity for your kids.
I'm not getting my kids to burn books.
No. I mean reading the letter on CommonLit, not burning the books.
Oh, okay.
Welcome to Across the Hall, a podcast sharing ELA strategies from one door away with your hosts, Cade Summers and Michelle Shelton. This is Episode 2, CommonLit Craze. Hey, I'm Cade.
And I'm Michelle.
And I'm not going to talk for a few minutes because of what just happened.
Oh, calm down. It's a podcast. You have to talk. We can talk about this struggle and hashtag the struggle at the end of the show.
All right, we'll save it. Meanwhile, this is Episode 2 on CommonLit. We're calling it CommonLit Craze. Why? Because, well, last week it was
Flip grid fever.
That's right. And, of course, we kind of caught on to the fever. We didn't come up with that term, and you can find that everywhere. You've heard of it by now. But CommonLit doesn't have that sort of really awesome title, so we're going to start the CommonLit Craze. Michelle and I went to pre-AP English training just about a month ago. And in my classroom, one thing I noticed with all of the teachers there, as I talked to them about different things that we think we're doing, that's awesome in our school district, I noticed that a lot of teachers didn't know about CommonLit. It's new to me, and I think, Michelle, you've used it a few times in your class too, right?
Yes, you actually introduced me to CommonLit. Thank you so much for that. I've used it mainly as test prep. But we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yes, there's definitely a lot of different uses. We'll be getting into that in this episode. We also want to preface this episode by also pointing out that next week we're going to do a CommonLit Part 2 with an interview of Anna Hodges. She actually works in the content development of the CommonLit website. So between now and then, if some of you in the audience have not tested out CommonLit, gone to their website, commonlit.org, it would be a great opportunity for you to go browse their website, see all the different texts that are there. I was just looking this morning and found that currently in their library of texts, with texts geared around grades 5 through 12, they have about 895 different texts.
That is a lot of text.
There's a ton. And from what I understand, just from people within our own circle of friends who do a lot with CommonLit and have even communicated with the folks at CommonLit, I understand that they're going to be adding more and more over time, which is pretty exciting.
So if you have any questions over the next week that you would like for us to ask Anna as we talk to her, just let us know. You can hashtag CommonLit Craze or hashtag X the Hall, and we will make sure to try to add those into our interview.
All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Our plan with this episode is a little bit different than the template for most of our other episodes. Typically, we have a what is it? Then we have a follow-up with ways to use it, how do we use it in the ELA classroom, and then, of course, we finish our episode with hashtag the struggle. We're going to be focused mostly on the ways to use it in the English classroom today, since we are waiting for our interview for next week. However, we do need to lead in just a little bit with some introduction to the CommonLit website. So on CommonLit, as we mentioned, the texts are challenging texts, they're grade appropriate texts. There are a variety of genres ranging from poetry to political theory to fiction, and most of the pieces are fairly short that can be read within a typical instructional block of 55 minutes for most students, and many of those texts will only take a matter of a few minutes, and then students begin to analyze or do whatever the teacher is wanting the student to do with that text that period.
So if you're completely just unfamiliar with CommonLit, basically it is a website where they offer many different kinds of text, like Cade said, from many different genres, on many different grade levels, many different themes, and they have questions already provided for you. They have multiple choice questions and they have short answer questions. So it's a wonderful wealth of information, a wealth of assignments that you can give students that are actually very high quality and connected to standards. And one of my very favorite features of CommonLit is the way that you can browse, the way that you can search. You can search by book, you can search by genre, grade level, literary device, text set, theme. And that is such an easy way to access what it is that you need for your particular unit.
Yeah, and I would like to kind of touch on some of those as we even have the website open in front of us as we're podcasting today. Just in the last 24 hours on our Twitter handle, which is at Across the Hall, where the O is a 0 and a cross, we actually sent out a poll and had a little bit of feedback on that poll. But basically, we gave 4 different options as to what teachers' favorite feature of CommonLit is, and it was overwhelmingly among the small group of people who responded that they appreciated the organization of texts the most. And it really is great. So definitely want to emphasize that here, especially for folks who aren't familiar with the website. As I kind of go to the text right now, I can select text by genre. And there are probably, let's say, about 25 different genres listed, and I'm going to just run through some of those. Allegory, autobiography, biography, drama, essay, fable, fantasy, fiction, folktale, memoir, myth, news, nonfiction, opinion, and so on. And I think, it's really important for students to be able to empathize. I think as English teachers, we like that part of teaching. That's why we value our novels so much, is because we think it's important that students not just be able to dissect a text to say what is going on, what is happening, and make connections to real-world events. But what I really like is this span of different types of texts that they can relate, they can empathize to those fictional texts that are included here, and also make connections to real-world concepts and use practical reading strategies in those nonfiction pieces as well.
Right, and as I'm sitting here looking at these different genres, he was talking about real-world connections. I see news on here, opinion. Also, if you are talking about literature, we have to kind of give historical background. A lot of times you have to set the scene for the kids, and so there are letters on here, legal documents, primary source documentation. So many different ways of pulling that in. Religious texts is part of the genre. So there are many historical fiction, historical documents. There's such a wealth of information and ways of searching for this. So if you want some informational text to help you to set the scene for a novel, then CommonLit is obviously a great resource for that.
And also, it's possible that we have some history teachers or some ELA teachers married to history teachers out there listening. And just as Michelle sort of pointed out, there is practical value to a website, CommonLit, that actually is not just for literature teachers. There are a lot of articles based on science, so science teachers might find value here and be able to implement or integrate some of those literacy standards that are in your science curriculum that you can utilize and tap into through the CommonLit website. And she just mentioned a lot about history. Obviously, history teachers can tap into this a lot as well. You're kind of on the opposite end of how I felt when a year or two ago I found out about the website News ELA. Yes, ELA is in the title of that website, but I always felt like even though there's a differentiation in lexile levels and you can take one text and have it at a higher level or lower level based on the needs of your students, I always felt like that was so specialized for the history or social studies class that I was having to maneuver a little bit to make it fit my classroom. So some of you might have to maneuver a little bit here to make it fit your history or science class. But different than Flipgrid last week and different than many of the types of EdTech tools that we're going to be looking at in Across the Hall, this website is designed for mostly literature teachers, mostly English teachers. So Michelle and I have had to think a little bit about our second segment, which every time our second segment, just like last week with Flipgrid, is that we apply it to the ELA classroom. Well, it's easy to apply CommonLit to an ELA classroom. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about ways that we might be able to take some of the features of CommonLit and actually explore, practical teaching strategies, practical uses in the classroom, more than just saying, here's a text, read it. Here's a text, analyze it.
Right.
And that's what we want to do now.
As an English teacher, I know that I've gone through different phases of creating units. I have created units based on theme. I have created units based on a central text, a focus text. I have created units based on genre and just kind of all over the place. I've even created units based on literary device. Maybe we're studying tone, so I find different texts that come in to help me to teach tone. Well, the thing with CommonLit is no matter how you are creating your units and what you're creating your units around, you have a way of browsing through and finding many different kinds of, or many different texts for that. So you can, if you're going by book, for example, I teach ninth grade and we teach To Kill a Mockingbird. So if I go to Kill a Mockingbird under book, then I can find a bunch of texts that will help me in teaching that. For example, there's a text about the Great Depression that would help me in giving them some historical content. There's a text about the Scottsboro Boys, which helps me in giving them that content as well. But there's also a poem called On Turning 10 by Billy Collins, which is a poem that I have taught before in 8th grade and in 9th grade. But in this case, thinking about that through the lens of Scout gives it an entirely different meaning. So if I were going by a focal book, that would be a wonderful way for me to find extra articles to pull in, extra text to pull in, to focus on To Kill a Mockingbird and the themes in To Kill a Mockingbird and the history behind that.
That's great. And in fact, I think, Michelle, you hit on something that, at least as far as I can see, and we'll ask Anna Hodges next week from CommonLit about this. As far as I can see, that's a new feature that CommonLit didn't have 5 or 6 months ago. You can actually look up certain books, and there's probably, what would you say, about 50 to 75 books here listed or more.
Oh, yes.
They are not accessible there. You might have to have a paper copy of it. You might have to have another source, web source or digital source to find that book. But what they do have are all of these text sets or related texts to those books. What you did in your class is similar to something that happened in mine. We read a part of The Crucible, and in reading part of that, I wanted my students to get some further background knowledge on the Salem witch trials. And this is great because it was an inclusion class, so I had a mixture of students of different lexile ranges. I had students who had 3rd or 4th grade reading ability, and I had students who were, this was a 10th grade class, students who were at a 10th and 11th grade reading ability. And the concept of the Salem witch trials should be accessible to everybody, not just the people who are at the highest reading level. The concept is understandable by my students who have lower reading abilities. And so what I love about CommonLit is I could search or have my students search Salem witch trials, and I could assign different students different nonfiction texts that would give them that background knowledge that could scaffold their understanding of the more complex, The Crucible. And that's really great. In fact, it was because of that assignment where I had a student, a male student, who really loved finding out about the way that society worked and the control of that society and how rumors spread in that society. I loved how that worked to get him motivated to read more. And as he found out things from that, and his parents found out that he was improving his reading ability and testing better on various standards that he was previously weak on, they actually contacted me and asked, is there a way that we as parents could have access to CommonLit over the summer when he is not under the oversight of teachers?
That is amazing.
And,
what an awesome tool.
And CommonLit came back and said in an email back to me, yes, and here's how. So even parents, aside from teachers, can go and reinforce what we're wanting to do in the classroom to make students better readers. And CommonLit is successfully doing that because of their attention to diverse needs of respective students in a classroom.
That's great. There's actually a parent guide tab on CommonLit if you need that, to print that out and to send that to your parents.
So let's talk about some other ways to use it in the English language arts classroom. First, I would say, just as we've kind of alluded to here, that it's useful to introduce a larger text. So just by looking at the CommonLit website and looking for those books that are featured there, you can go ahead and start getting some texts that are related to it without a whole lot of effort. So talk about saving a teacher some time, trying to find something that relates. Use what's already there. And by the way, as a side note, when you're looking for those related texts, go to Pinterest and search for CommonLit. There's actually a page on Pinterest that's called Teaching with CommonLit. It's at pinterest.com, and we'll include that in our show notes. But there are tons of little bookmark-looking pictures that have 6 or 7 of these side texts, these paired passages for texts like Night and Wonder and Hamlet and Lightning Thief, Lord of the Flies, and I believe that these all come from CommonLit. So you'll notice those paired texts and how useful that'll be for your classroom.
Another thing that is great about CommonLit is just being able to differentiate, being able to find articles on many different levels. As you know, most of the students in a classroom are not all reading on the same level. So if you have some struggling students, you can search CommonLit by Lexile or by grade level and find them some stories that are on a level that they can understand. And the questions that go along with those stories will also be on a level that they are able to answer. So that's a great use for that to build up those students and also to challenge the students who are a little bit ahead. You can bump up that Lexile and find some more difficult, more challenging text that'll have more challenging questions to go along with them to make them have to think a little harder.
Yeah, we want to accommodate those students, but we also want to see them from the beginning to the end of the school year improve and strengthen their reading abilities. So this is a great tool to do that. In addition to introducing a larger text, in addition to differentiation, you could also use CommonLit to explore themes related to a text that you're wanting to focus on in a class. Also, historical background, looking at similar styles and genres to a larger text, making connections to current events, and even teaching argument. So when it comes to, using as an introduction to something else, all of these are great ways to use the CommonLit text to drive to a much bigger purpose. And I would recommend using the tool or the feature in the menu at CommonLit that says Text Sets. And it's just a matter of clicking on one that takes you to a variety of different options that would then fit what you're looking for. And this would be useful not only for English, but also your especially history classes. So the next use in ELA would be to explore theme. And just to give you one example as to how this works, you can browse text by a thematic topic. So for example, you'll find power and greed on there. Once you click on power and greed, it's going to give you 2 different directions you could explore. You could explore how does money buy happiness, or you could explore how does power corrupt. And let's just say you clicked on how does power corrupt related to power and greed. And when you click on it, if you're an 11th or 12th grade teacher, you're going to have 12 different texts as options to read. If you're a 9th or 10th grade teacher, you're going to have 16 different texts related to how does power corrupt. If you are a 7th or 8th grade teacher, you're going to have 11 different texts. Be able to examine those, maybe even just provide all of those as options for your students to read. And if you're a 5th or 6th grade teacher, there are at least 5 different texts at that grade level on the subject of how does power corrupt. And of course, that, if you have high-level readers in 5th and 6th grade, well, then boost them up to, a higher Lexile range. So I just find that really amazing, that breakdown of all of those thematic topics. What is another way to use it in ELA?
Well, I mentioned earlier that I've used it as test prep, and I know that we don't teach to the test, but sometimes it's good just to give the students practice with reading something that they've never seen before, something you haven't discussed in class, to see where they are. So using these as cold reads is a wonderful way to use it in the classroom. You can find something that's interesting that you think would be interesting to the students. You can differentiate if you need to do that, but just giving them something completely out of context of what you have been teaching to give them that opportunity to read something completely fresh and see if make sure that those skills are translating over into something they're reading on their own rather than something that the teacher has constantly discussed with them.
Just recently, toward the end of the year, there was an element of CommonLit that I don't think many people see, that one of our colleagues chose to do. And she had asked me to video record her in class. She actually was in connection with one of the folks at CommonLit who was asking her about some of the work that she's doing. And the way that she was using CommonLit in her classroom was to actually, number one, for class discussion. she used it as a way to explore argument and supporting an argument in discussion, and they had some debate as well as dialogue. And so it's kind of a Socratic seminar type format. After reading one larger text, they looked at some related texts thematically and began to explore that larger text in light of the knowledge and information they gleaned from these smaller texts on CommonLit. I found that really interesting, and the kids were really engaged by having this related text that was interesting and something that they could talk a lot about. Also, this was a class that was working toward and preparing for their AP test, their AP language test. She was using CommonLit, that is our colleague, our friend, to have the students actually practice their AP writing skills. And after they had all written their responses to the really great in-depth questions that CommonLit provides in their discussion questions, after they had written their responses, then they actually showed those responses up on the screen, and of course no names attached to them. She had actually copied and pasted it into, I think, PowerPoint or something, and she was displaying each of these students' work without their names associated with it, and the students themselves were having to evaluate the work that they were displaying on the screen and score that as if it was the AP test, AP writing test, and see how each of them did, and also be able to pick that apart and be able to identify the expected components of the test and whether or not they were meeting those expectations. I thought that was a really amazing use for CommonLit and used in different ways to make the students better arguers as well as better writers.
That does sound great. And speaking of argument, if you are looking under the library and searching and you click on literary devices, they have ethos, logos, and pathos. So if you want to teach each of those parts of argument, you can do that by clicking on that and seeing what they have. So I'm clicking on ethos right now. I see speeches by presidents. Here's President Reagan's speech at the Brandenburg Gate. Here's President Obama. I see RFK's speech following the death of MLK. But then you also have why I refuse to say I fight my disability. Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions. You have On Revenge by Sir Francis Bacon. So you can teach argument very well through CommonLit, and they've already categorized those for you. So that is incredibly helpful.
I can connect to that as a 10th grade teacher. We read The Tragedy of Julius Caesar, and that's usually a 4th 9 weeks assignment or text that we're reading in my class. And during that time, we talk a lot about argument. When we get to the scene with Brutus and Antony, and I know many of you English teachers out there do this, you analyze their two speeches, which one is more effective and why, and you pick their arguments apart and the rhetorical devices that they each use. But we don't stop at that. I try to make my kids connect to something modern, some modern speech, and what Michelle just referred to within CommonLit is really great for that, because there are a variety of different modern speeches that the students can then not only read but also be assessed in each of those targeted areas or standards-based areas. And so I think that's really, really great as far as a feature of CommonLit and how you can extend a larger text as well as challenge the students with specific standard-based skills.
Right. You can actually set, whenever you assign an article to a class, you can set it so that they have to answer guiding questions along the way. And that way, they can't just go and click through questions. They actually have to answer a question before it will open up the next part of the text. So they will have that part of it kind of blurred out. Some of the questions that they ask in the assessment, I'm looking right here at President Obama's State of the Union address in 2015. The first question is, which two of the following best summarize the central ideas of the text? So covering central idea. Which two of the following quotes best support the answer to part A? And the reason that I'm reading you that is because one of our colleagues mentioned that she was looking over the data that CommonLit provides to see what was going on with her students who were not performing very well on the CommonLit passages. And she noticed that the students who were missing that part A that said which two of the following best summarize the central ideas were also missing the evidence question. Which of these quotes best support? They were having a hard time figuring out the evidence for that. So that was something that she was able to use in her classroom to kind of fill in those learning gaps As far as that data goes that I'm referring to, whenever you assign something, once the students have finished the assignment, you have all kind of charts showing you how they have done, how they're performing. You have pie charts, you have line graphs. There's so much data provided for you that
item analysis. Where,
yes.
How many of your students? What percentage of students missed this one? What was their answer? Was it letter A, B, C, or D? And so you can see not only which question, but also be able to gather that data and determine, is there a specific standard that you need to address more heavily in your class in order to improve that. Or is this question worded a certain way that students have not been exposed to, that one day they could see on the ACT and fumble just because they're not familiar with that type of phrasing or diction used within the question itself. And so you can easily target what those commonalities might be between students by looking at the percentages within that data analysis feature that comes after students have completed assignments.
Right. And you can look at your class as a whole, and you can look at individual students. There's even a thing on here where you can compare how they've been doing on informational text versus how they do on literary texts. So there's so much information that you can use going forward and thinking of how you need to modify, adapt your instruction to get the students where you want them to be.
Right. So let's go ahead and delve into just a few more different ways to use it in the ELA classroom, and then we'll be done for today and be anticipating next week.
Don't forget the struggle. We got to do the struggle.
That's right. We got to do the struggle. You're right. So as Michelle was pointing out, I think, targeting student skill deficits. So if you, especially, I teach a couple of inclusion classes, and we want to do this with all students, but there are, of course, various deficits that students with IEPs do have, and that teachers are obligated, for the sake of this student's good and growth, to look at those deficits and target them and develop them more so than you would maybe in other students. So if a student is not identifying main ideas well, you can select that one area, or defining words by context clues, or analyzing structure or theme or author's purpose. You name it based on the standard, and you can target that for one particular student, which is really great. I cannot just assign a text by the entire class, but I can individually assign texts to individual students within a class, which allows so much room for that differentiation, which Michelle was talking about. And finally, one feature we haven't talked about, but Michelle did mention the fact that you would do a cold read sometimes,
Yes.
just for a standard assessment or something. One feature we didn't talk about was the fact that even if students do not have a computer in the classroom, and you're listening to this, and you're wondering, how can I use this? This all sounds really, really great, but my kids only go to a computer lab once a week. At the top of every text within CommonLit is a link or is a button that you can press for downloading a PDF. And when you download the PDF, you are not just downloading the text of what your students are reading, but you're also downloading the picture that's associated with it that CommonLit has represented the text with, which, visual is nice for students. It will also print that out. But even more, it will print out the questions that your students need to answer. And so that is a really, really great feature that when teachers do not have the tech in the classroom, they're able to still use this tool for students. And I think that's just awesome, as well as where the questions are listed in this packet or on this PDF, it actually indicates the standard that question relates to. So this is great for documentation purposes, as well as just simply a rigorous, challenging question for students to respond to.
And the PDF feature would also be helpful if you have to give common formative assessments, so that everyone in that grade level or in that particular subject matter can give the exact same test, and you can use CommonLit for that as well, and know that your questions are going to be connected to the standards.
And so I think it's now time, Michelle. Time for hashtag
The struggle.
And boy, have we had a struggle today.
it has been struggle after struggle, actually.
It is now cliche to say at one-to-one schools, you always have to be prepared when technology doesn't
work.
That's right. And it didn't today. And so Michelle and I had scheduled an interview with Anna Hodges, and this was supposed to be a one-day, one-part episode on CommonLit. We're creating a CommonLit Craze here. So it was going to be a single day, boom, we got you, and then just watching it blow up on Twitter in such a positive way.
That's not how it went down. That is not at all how it happened.
Instead, in episode 2, we contact someone we deem very, very credible, a great expert in the field at CommonLit. And Anna Hodges first says, we see her on the screen, she says, "I can't see you." That's great. All right, we'll fix it. Hang on.
While we're fixing it, may I add in that half the fire department walked in the room and we still don't know why?
It's summertime. We have a fairly new career tech building. This is a year old, and they are amazed. Anybody who is given a tour of our school has got to come look at our TV recording studio. So, hello, we're recording. We are so impressed with what you have here at Oxford High School. And I don't think they even had a clue as to what we were doing. But nonetheless, next thing is we start really glitching out, and Anna can't understand what we're saying. It sounded like this. And anyway, so you talk about hashtag the struggle. We are going to make it next week. We have her as a guest, and this is going to give you some time to respond on Twitter. Ask some questions or tell us some questions you would like for us to ask Anna when she's with us. And we're so excited that she's going to be a part of our episode 3 now. And it's going to be CommonLit Craze Part 2.
More CommonLit. Lots and lots of CommonLit. And we do love CommonLit. But it was supposed to be one episode. But that's all right. And may I also just mention the elephant in the room that Cade's phone keeps beeping. And so I know that you can hear that. So we are struggling today. But that's okay because we are teachers and we know how to roll with the punches. If we know anything, we know to roll with the punches.
So we hope you'll be back with us next week. Join us for CommonLit Craze Part 2.
Part 2
will be our episode 3 with Anna Hodges, our special guest.
And remember that if you're having your own struggles, to tweet hashtag the struggle x the hall and join in the conversation.
All right, until next time, we will see you later and
enjoy
the rest of your summer. Thanks so much for listening to Episode 2, CommonLit Craze. Next week, CommonLit Content Development Director Anna Hodges will be with us for an interview to complete our 2-part series on CommonLit. Don't forget to check out our show notes at acrossthehallpodcast.com and find us on Twitter at acrossthehall, where the O in across is a 0. When finished listening today, join the conversation on Twitter at hashtag #xthehall, share your struggles at hashtag #thestruggleXthehall, and take a few minutes to leave us a review on iTunes. See you next time.